A cargo aircraft is a fixed-wing aircraft that is designed or converted for the carriage of cargo, rather than passengers. Such aircraft usually do not incorporate passenger amenities and generally feature one or more large doors for loading cargo. Freighters may be operated by civil passenger or cargo airlines, by private individuals or by the armed forces of individual countries. Aircraft designed for cargo flight usually have features that distinguish them from conventional passenger aircraft. A wide, tall fuselage cross-section. A high wing to allow the cargo area to sit near the ground. Numerous wheels to allow it to land at unprepared locations. And a high-mounted tail to allow cargo to be driven directly into and off the aircraft. By 2015, dedicated freighters represent 43% of the 700 billion ATK capacity, while 57% is carried in airliners' cargo holds. And Boeing forecast belly freight to rise to 63%, while specialized cargoes would represent 37% of a 1,200 billion ATKs in 2035. The Cargo Facts consulting firm forecasts that the global freighter fleet will rise from 1,782 in 2019 to 2,920 20 years later. Aircraft were put to use carrying cargo in the form of airmail as early as 1911. Although the earliest aircraft were not designed primarily as cargo carriers, by the mid-1920s aircraft manufacturers were designing and building dedicated cargo aircraft. In the UK during the early 1920s, the need was recognized for a freighter aircraft to transport troops and material quickly to pacify tribal revolts in the newly occupied territories of the Middle East. The Vickers-Vernon, a development of the Vickers-Vimy commercial, entered service with the Royal Air Force as the first dedicated troop transport in 1921. In February 1923, this was put to use by the RAF's Iraq Command, who flew nearly 500 Sikh troops from Kingarban to Kirkuk in the first ever strategic airlift of troops. Vickers Victorias played an important part in the Kabul airlift of November 1928 to February 1929. When they evacuated diplomatic staff and their dependents together with members of the Afghan royal family endangered by a civil war. The Victorias also helped to pioneer air routes for Imperial Airways Handley Page HP.42 airliners. The World War II German design. The Arado AR-232 was the first purpose-built cargo aircraft. The AR-232 was intended to supplant the earlier Junkers Ju-52 freighter conversions, but only a few were built. Most other forces used freighter versions of airliners in the cargo role as well. Most notably the C-47 Skytrain version of the Douglas DC-3, which served with practically every Allied nation. One important innovation for future cargo aircraft design was introduced in 1939. With the fifth and sixth prototypes of the Junkers Ju-94 engined military transport aircraft. With the earliest known example of a rear loading ramp. This aircraft, like most of its era, used tail dragger landing gear, which caused the aircraft to have a decided rearward tilt when landed. These aircraft introduced the tripoclap, a powerful ramp, hydraulic lift with a personnel stairway centered between the vehicle trackway ramps, that raised the rear of the aircraft into the air and allowed easy loading. A similar rear loading ramp even appeared in a somewhat different form on the nosewheel. Gear-equipped, late WW2 era American Bud RB-1 Conestoga twin-engined cargo aircraft. Post-war Europe also served to play a major role in the development of the modern air cargo and air freight industry. It is during the Berlin airlift at the height of the Cold War, when a massive mobilization of aircraft was undertaken by the West to supply West Berlin with food and supplies, in a virtual around-the-clock air bridge, after the Soviet Union closed and blockaded Berlin's land links to the West to rapidly supply the needed numbers of aircraft. Many older types, especially the Douglas C-47 Skytrain, were pressed into service. In operation, it was found that it took as long or longer to unload these older designs as the much larger tricycle landing gear Douglas C-54 Skymaster, which was easier to move about in when landed. The C-47s were quickly removed from service, and from then on flat decks were a requirement of all new cargo designs. In the years following the war era, a number of new custom-built cargo aircraft were introduced, often including some experimental features. For instance, The US's C-82 packet featured a removable cargo area, while the C-123 provider introduced the now common rear fuselage, upswept tail shaping to allow for a much larger rear loading ramp. But it was the introduction of the turboprop that allowed the class to mature. And even one of its earliest examples, the C-130 Hercules, in the 21st century as the Lockheed Martin C-130J, is still the yardstick against which newer military transport aircraft designs are measured. Although larger, smaller and faster designs have been proposed for many years, the C-130 continues to